All right. So, welcome to our interview here on God's design for agriculture. I have here with me Brother Jerry Travers, who has been gardening for many years, and we'll ask him more about that as we get into our interview. And the reason why we want to conduct this interview here is because we know that we are living in the last days. If you do not think that we're living in the last days, then you might live under a rock. But we are basically on the brink of some great calamity that will take place in our world. We can see the tensions in our world, social tension, tension with race, tension with religion, and just this country is so divided at this point in time. And we feel like everything is collapsing to some of us. And also, this is a great opportunity to usher in a new order of things. But what we can do or what we can control is where we live and also what we grow. We can control our food and our self-sufficiency, the supply of food and various items that we need as we approach the end of time. So it's very important for us to understand how to grow our own food. Now, we're not just taking this from a prepper standpoint, but also we want to show you the character behind why we should grow our own food, the spirituality, and also what lessons God has to teach us through growing our own food as well. We're going to have power pack time today. And as I said before, if you are just joining us here, we have more people coming on. As we've been speaking, share this far and wide because this information that you're about to hear is very important and it might actually change your life or even save your life. Because some of us out here, we are living on borrowed time. It is far time that we got up and we grow our own food and moved to the countryside. And we're going to be talking about the importance of these things here today. So we're going to get straight into our interview. And before we get into our interview, also just want to start off with a word of prayer for all those who are joining here so that Lord can bless you and open up your hearts to receive the information that we're sharing this afternoon. Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you so much for everyone that has joined us thus far in this interview. And I pray that as we go throughout this interview, that you may guide our conversation. And also for everyone that is joining, help them to be receptive of the information that would be received. Help them to be so receptive that they put it into action. Help us, dear Lord, to present very balanced and very actionable that can actually help people that are living in many different areas of this world and in the city or in the suburbs, or some of us are in the country already, and we want to learn more on how to grow our own food and why that is important for this end time. So Lord, continue to be with us throughout this interview is my prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Okay, so we're going to get right into our questions. So as I said before, right now we have our brother here with us, Brother Jerry, and just want to give us an introduction of who you are, and also how you got into agriculture.
Um, let's see. I'm 73 years old right now. So my father came out of New York City um, during the Depression, and it was difficult to feed yourself at that time. A lot of soup lines in New York City, and but he was moved out with his dad onto a farm, and it was at least farmland. And so when I was 4, he taught me how to hoe a row, put down chemical fertilizer, 5-10-10, pull one side over the fertilizer, put the seeds down, pull one side over the other. And this is how you planted. Well, when I was 21, I learned about organic methods of planting. And that was without all the chemicals and using natural things, primarily manure. That's what the idea for organic was. But to transition into today, now we're learning that even that has a lot of problems. The organic agriculture has a lot of chemicals, and I had to give it up because give it up using manures because of all the uh, what do you call it when you have parasites, all the parasitites They have all kinds of chemicals for that, and uh, and so antibiotics that they give to the animals, and you get these in your food. They
Yeah.
come right into the food. So I had to transition from that. But this is wise understanding because at the time of Ellen White, at the turn of the 1900s, there was a man by the name of uh, Samuel Morgan. He was from England, and he was teaching people how significant it was to be using grasses themselves as your mulch, as your fertilizer in the crops. And this is before antibiotics. And he was showing how cities that were fed using manure, you had a lot of horses, you had a lot of manure, and they were growing the crops on that. The boys that were in the Crimean War that would get seriously wounded, most of them would die that were city boys. But the country boys, because there's not a lot of animals in the country and there's very little manure, so you had to use hay material to do your mulching, they would usually live with the serious wounds because they were able to heal. So right now, agriculture is going into what's called regenerative agriculture. They're rebuilding the soils again now, using God's design, which is using plants to produce the fertility that's needed to grow healthy food.
Okay.
So this is what we're into now.
Okay. So we're going to get into the regenerative form of agriculture. But it's very interesting what you stated, how your dad came out because of the depression and got some farmland and started agriculture, which is kind of similar to what we want to teach here during this whole weekend, is that, there is a time when it's like a Great Depression will take place, especially for the people of God, where then we will not be able to buy or sell. That is found in the book of Revelation, where it talks about you not being able to buy and sell. And if you're not able to buy and sell, then how are you going to eat? Well, there is one way to eat, which is to grow your own food. And those who grow their own food during that time will live like kings and queens. Um, and I'm sure that helped you guys, especially to get through the depression. Is that so?
Yeah, that was actually my grandfather is the one who moved out. My father was
Okay.
just a young man at that time.
Uh-huh.
Well, not even a man yet. He was still a teenager.
Yeah.
And but that was necessary to eat, yes. And so everybody had a garden out there.
Yeah.
And the thing is, out in the country, just like right around the place you have here, you have all these fruit trees that were planted long ago. They
Yeah.
just need care to be brought back into production.
Yes,
So
sir.
you needed fruits, you needed vegetables. You can grow your vegetable, and then you had nut trees all around because the
Yeah.
farmers, they weren't fools. They saved the hickory nuts. They saved the walnut trees.
Yeah.
And so, you have fruits, nuts, and vegetables. And then, of course, you have the native grain corn of the Americas. It was developed here in the Americas by the natives. And so that grows really well. And so there you go. You have your balanced diet right there.
Yeah.
And the natives also developed many varieties of beans, too,
Yeah.
types of pole beans and things. So it's just a matter of learning how to do it.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And also, we want to tell people that this information that we're sharing can be applied to wherever that you live, because we do have some people from South Africa, from different areas, of the world here, and a lot more people from New York and the US as well. But we just wanted to teach the principles of agriculture and gardening and so forth. Now, I want to talk about, because now there's also a spiritual connection with agriculture. Obviously, this whole theme here is God's design for agriculture. So now, what got you into like the perspective of God's design for agriculture? Did you grow up in the
No.
church? Did you grow up knowing about God's method and so forth?
No, I grew up and was a Catholic, went to Catholic school, but I was taught evolution. And then I went to public schools and they taught evolution. And when you learn evolution, everything is fighting one another.
Yeah.
So you have this constant competition and only the strongest survive. And that's a true thing. Weak things do die out. But the bottom line is God made a creation design where everything in it is serving everything
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
So we have starting from the tiniest ones, we have the microbes in the soil. God designed them to produce and make the fertility and be the fertility for plants.
Yeah.
And so, and then the plants, of course, they serve the nutrition to the animals that eat them, and
Yep. Yep.
then and everything. There is not one thing in God's creation. There is not an activity of one thing in God's creation that is not an activity of service. Even those things that we call evil, that are for instance, a predation or parasitism, they all have beneficial effects of helping to clean up the gene pool of the weak and the sick and bring back healthfulness. And so we have to learn all these activities of service and understand them. And when we work with that design, then we get the benefits. Then we start to develop medicine in our food, like Hippocrates says, let
Yeah,
your food be your medicine, your
definitely.
medicine be your food. So,
And for those who are joining on who might not know, we actually have a lifestyle center here, upstate New York, and we help people reverse their health conditions and we help people overcome their illnesses naturally. So then when we look at how we do that, one of the laws of health that we look at is called nutrition. And nutrition is very important in the reversal of disease. And then people might ask the question like, how can you subsist on a plant-based diet? For instance, the evolutionists. So the biology, evolutionary biology, they believe that we were some primitive men. We ate largely of animals. We are some cavemen and we ate animals. And some people even go to the point where they go back to eating raw foods. And they think that, oh, I need big muscles. Go back to eating some raw meat and stuff like that. They actually have a guy out there online who does eat raw meat. But it's such a difference with creation. We creationists, we believe in the creation of God, and we believe that God placed us in Genesis in the Garden of Eden. And in the Garden of Eden, he gave man plant-based foods. Now, when you look at every single animal on the planet, every mammal, all of them are sustained from the ground. Everything comes from the ground, basically. It comes from the ground, even the plants. Like we look at the soil, we cannot eat dirt, obviously, because this is not, it's inorganic to us, it's not absorbable. But the plants absorbs the nutrients from the soil. And sometimes even you talk about the microorganisms, like worms, eats the soil and poops it out and makes it more bioavailable for the plants. And the plants bear fruits. And now that is bioavailable for us. And even when you look at those animals that are what we call unclean, those animals eat clean animals. And those clean animals get their food from the ground, from the plants. So everything comes from the ground. And what we have come to in our time is we've come to a point where the ground is not treated properly, or it's treated to a point for mass production. I just want to get the quickest and plants as possible, have a large quantity, and these guys have these big machines, and now they even have drones that spray the chemicals from the sky, and everything has become automated for mass production, making money, commercialization of our foods, and that is just like depleting and destroying our soil, which kind of goes away from God's intent for us, with agriculture, God's design for agriculture. We want to work with the ecosystem that we have. Even like the rain that falls, like my wife was using some water from our well to water the plants, and she realized that some of the leaves were browning. And but when we use the rainwater, the plants started to thrive and the leaves started to come out greener. Is because there were too much of the inorganic minerals and stuff like that coming from the well underground, all those rocks and stuff like that. And it was just the leaves were wilted. And when she started to switch to the rainwater, which God, allows it to rain, and those plants came out thriving. So it's just like understanding how we can work with our environment, how we can work with what God has already placed in our environment for food. And when we look at the forest too as well, the forest, the leaves fall down, the leaves break apart, and it creates this compost that is the top layer of the soil and covers the soil, which the microorganisms underneath love and feeds on. And it's just like God intended for all this to work together.
yeah.
And when you see that, especially did you grow up not believing in God, or you always believed in God from the time you
Well,
were?
I knew there was a God, but when you're taught the concept of evolution, you think everything is fighting, and you
Yeah,
don't realize, and I didn't realize, even when I was an Adventist for the first 15 years, I kept wondering, how do you see God in nature? It wasn't until the Lord opened my mind and then I began to write about it that you see him everywhere in that his design shows his character of a servant. Jesus came to serve. He came to demonstrate service.
yeah,
That's the character of our Heavenly Father. So everything in nature is doing that. What has not been understood is that in agriculture, it's only recently that we've come to realize that God's design is that microbes actually are swallowed by plants. Plants swallow microbes in the first 2 inches of the root out in the soil. They take microbes into themselves, and then in the next 2 inches, some of these microbes release their nutrition and then reproduce because the environment is so nice inside the plant. They reproduce themselves, and then they're sent back out to re-inoculate the soil through the root hairs. And spread as the root goes. They spread. The plant itself spreads the microbes out in the soil, and they go feed in the soil, and they turn around and they're food once again for the plant. But not all of them are released their nutrition in the roots. Many of them are sent to the leaves and to the fruit and to the stems and other areas of the plant where they then release their nutrition there, and then they're sent back down into the roots and go back out into the soil to feed again. And so this is what goes on in nature, in prairies and in forests that are untouched by men.
yeah,
But when we change that system and we start fertilizing, and it could be with manures because folks, once the system changed over to people no longer feeding themselves, this is when you had cities. You didn't
yeah,
have room to feed yourself, so you got the food from the countryside. They started feeding. When they had to feed somebody else, they noticed the tricks of what was going on. They noticed that if you had manure around something, it grew bigger.
yeah,
They said, we're selling by volume
yeah,
now. So now we start
yeah.
putting manure
More
around things
money.
so we can sell by volume. But the thing is that manure makes the food unhealthy.
Yeah,
And like I gave you that example there, before we had antibiotics,
yeah,
people died
yeah,
because they
yeah,
were
yeah,
unhealthy because of it. So that system developed. And then, of course, after they uh, after World War I, they learned that all these ammunition factories that made explosives, they could be used for fertilizer. That's why you have like the Oklahoma bombing, which was a fertilizer bomb that was blown up in front of the building there,
mm,
ammonium nitrate. And so you started getting chemical nitrogen being used. And at each stage you do it, you degenerate the plant. And the protein tissue, which is made from the nitrogen, starts making poor and poorer quality protein for us in our food. So it's just a degeneration. And worse yet is the plants themselves genetically turn off their feeding process, because you see the plants
yeah,
themselves attract microbes to themselves by feeding them, by exuding into the soil the nutrition that they need. And so now, once the plants don't need that nutrition because we're putting on a fertilizer, they turn that off.
yeah.
They turn off their feeding process. And so now the microbes don't even come to the
And they're
plant.
dependent now on. So what
Right.
about using those seeds from those plants? Um, and that has,
Exactly,
yeah,
exactly. Those seeds are shut off. Their genes
yeah,
are shut off. And so
dependent.
they have to start searching in the soil to find microbes again and to get their feeding process going back again. And that gives times for the weeds to get
Yeah,
going
yeah,
because
definitely.
they do have their own microbiome and they're ready to feed the microbes in the
Yeah.
soil.
And now you're dependent on conventional methods of growing. We're using their seeds and everything, and it becomes so the thing is, um, I guess growing up, in the US, there's this industrialization, right? This
Mhm.
big boom of industrialization, also in food. And there is this mass production of food. But at the same time, what this have done is, as you mentioned, so many examples of it kills the soil and it kills, deteriorates the soil over time, and even the microbes, more importantly, in those soils. Because I can go out there on our land, which prior to us being there might have been untouched for years. And when I start to dig into that soil, I see a bunch of microorganisms. I see the worms, I see the bugs, I see all the stuff inside the soil, and you can see that is active. But when you go out there and you look at some of the soil from those mega farmers, you dig into that soil and you don't see much life, much movement in that soil.
Yeah.
And it's like some of those hash chemicals. Just imagine spraying your plants or your soil with glyphosate and Roundup. Those
Yeah.
things will.
See, the glyphosate, which is the chemical in Roundup, that is the most used antibiotic on earth. And anti means against, and bio means life. So against life.
Yeah.
So it sterilizes the soil.
Yeah, definitely. Kills all bacteria, good bacteria.
Well, it kills the bacteria,
yeah,
the fungi, the yeast, all the algae and the other things that are all necessary to feed the plant. So you shut down God's feeding system. And now what you do is you basically just use the dirt to hold the plants upright. And then you give them a hydroponic solution, water-soluble fertilizer. That's what the NPK stands for on the fertilizer bag, is how much is in water-soluble form. And that ends up going to feed them. So now, like I said, you're growing them hydroponically, and that's not God's design at all. When you use God's design, you start getting improvements. The potential for corn is like 1,100 pounds per acre, but good corn production is about 250 pounds per acre, and that's can be using chemicals and possibly maybe not as much production with the organics pushing it. But when they started adding microbes back into the soil. For instance, they broke the record for corn production in the United States just 2 years ago. And what they added was green algae.
Yeah,
Imagine
I've been
using
seeing
a
a lot of
microbe that's supposed to be living in the soil, but it's killed off. They added it back to the soil, and it actually ended up increasing corn production and breaking records. And so if we really want to get to that 1,100 pounds per acre, we have to be adopting God's system.
Definitely. And, speaking of, God's system, man's system is all about the dollar signs, the money. And commercialization is all about the money. And I understand that you need to have a profit, but some of them want to go into the profits into the millions. If I want to be rich, how can I expand this empire that I'm building? And how can I add more food into my barn to just have more money and sit down with more wealth? And even when you look at the creation of genetically modified foods, it was almost like an accident. They were experimenting, trying to come up with a way to allow foods to grow, but also kill the weeds around it with some of those harsh chemicals. And then they found this bacteria that allowed some of the plants to survive with this hash Roundup and glyphosate to be sprayed on there. And then they took that and mutated it with the plants. So then now it has that where it can grow now with spraying Roundup around and killing all the weeds. So then you can fire all these people that weed out the plants and all of that. And now you just have this fields being sprayed with glyphosate. And I've seen those guys spray those chemicals before we had drones and everything. And they have all this mask, this hazmat suit and everything, and they're spraying it. And it's dangerous chemical. And now just imagine we consuming this in our foods. And some people say, "Oh, I'm going to wash my foods," but fruits and stuff. I know it's porous.
They use systemics today. Systemics are chemicals that the plant takes up inside itself. You can't wash the inside of the plant.
Definitely.
You can't wash the inside of the apple tissue. It's there, and you eat it, and it becomes part of you. 95% of the American public pee out daily Roundup. 90%. That is not a healthy thing. And it's an antibiotic, so it's killing off even our own body's microbiome, which is necessary for our immune system, our heart health, ovary health, adrenal health. So we don't want to be using that type of agriculture. We want to understand God's design and learn to work with it. And in God's design, not only did he give us a responsibility in Genesis 2:5 for how to care for for the microbes in the soil, but he also gave us a responsibility to use a design that he gave us in Genesis 2:15. We were to dress the garden, and we were to keep it the way he designed it. When we do that, uh, that is a particular design. And when you look at nature, you don't see monocrops,
Yeah.
except where the soil has been totally destroyed, where one crop will come in, after a volcanic eruption and begin to pioneer and develop the soil so that other plants can start to come in. So in nature, you have these ecosystems of a number of different plants. And so planting our garden with a number of different plants increases the nutrition because the roots share with one another. The aerosols that are let out into the air, we call them fragrances or odors or things like that, they share nutrition with one another. The whole forest, this is why we have the Smoky Mountains in America and the Virginia Blue Mountains, that smoky haze in Georgia and that blue haze in Virginia is actually chemicals released into the air by the plants, sharing that nutrition with the whole forest. So we want this to go on in our garden. So that's why we don't want a monoculture of just one type of thing. We want a number of different plants put together. They will not only, their roots will intertwine and they will share with one another the nutrition they have in their roots, but they will also share the volatile chemicals in the air with one another that are nutrition that plants need. So there's quite everywhere you look in nature, it's all the character of
Yeah.
God. It's one service, one for another.
Yeah, and it's the same thing for health. When we work with people, we understand that a lot of times people work against the body. When we go to the conventional routes of healing, the medications that we take, for instance, someone has a flu, and they have a fever. Sometimes they try to bring the fever down, whereas the body wants that fever to produce more white and red blood cells. It's like, why are you working against the body? Someone is coughing and sneezing. The body's trying to propel the virus out of the system. They give them antihistamines, which sends a signal to the brain to cough and sneeze to get rid of that virus. And constantly, man is working against God, working against God's design. But God has a reason why we cough. He has a reason why we sneeze. He has a reason why all these things are in our environment, and we just work against it. And our food is basically where it's coming to a point where it's making us sick. And even when we look at, this, you talked about the antibiotics in our food, not only the animals have antibiotics, but the glyphosate that is sprayed in, that is an antibiotic, it disrupts in our gut flora, our microbiome in our body itself. And some people now, there's an increased rate of what we call celiac disease with people, sensitivity towards wheat and stuff like that. And even some studies have alluded that it's because of the conventional ways of growing, it has enabled, obviously the wheat has changed a bit, but also we cannot break down the protein as best as we could have back in the day because of our disruption in our microbiome.
When you switch over from God's design, which is over 70% of the air is nitrogen. And so when you switch over and do not use the nitrogen from the air, but you use nitrogen, chemical nitrogen, the explosive industry switching over, making fertilizer, when you use the manure and the nitrates that are in the manure and ammonia that's in the manure, when you use those, you no longer have a healthy form of nitrogen to make proteins. And so now you start getting protein problems. And then, of course, when you genetically modify, say, wheat, that was genetically modified, although they do not call it genetic modification. It was actually a mutation, but it modified the gene.
Yes.
So now you have forms of protein that never existed in wheat before. And rattlesnake poison is a protein. Many other poisons are protein. So now we're manufacturing in our wheat, because of the mutation of the wheat, proteins that are making people sick. This is why you get the gluten intolerance. It was done through the agriculture, and it was done through the agricultural changing of the wheat and making it a 1.5 foot tall stalk. They didn't have enough potassium anymore to grow the 4 to 5 foot tall stalk. And so when they genetically modified it and these sick wheat plants came out with a 1.5 foot tall stalk, which didn't need as much potassium to stand it upright, that saved them from losing wheat because the stalk, when it was tall and didn't have enough potassium, would fall over, called lodging, and we'd lose a lot of wheat on the planet. So when they developed a short stalk, it saved more of the wheat and increased production. And they gave Borlaug a Nobel Peace Prize for increasing food production on the planet. But the thing is, it increased the proteins that never existed before. And so now it was a poisoning type of wheat. And it doesn't matter whether you grow it organically or not, it still has these poisonous type proteins in there that make people sick and give them gluten, that's the proteination part of the wheat, intolerance.
Yeah.
Our agriculture has reached into um, many unhealthful practices have developed as a result of it. So going back to God's way and his methods is just going to start to put the nutrition back into the food that's missing. One, it's going to stop killing the microbes in the soil, and they'll be able to feed the plant the way God designed it to, and we won't be mutating it because they'll start adapting. They'll start adapting themselves instead of being adapted for chemical agriculture, they will be now adapted back for microbial feeding. And so just getting with God's program is nothing but beneficial.
Yes, yes, definitely. And just for those who are watching, people are always concerned about genetically modified foods. Not all foods are genetically modified on the markets, just so people can understand this as well. It's a handful of foods, and also about 90 to 95% of foods that are genetically modified are fed to livestock. And that's basically one of the major reasons why genetically modified foods was created in the first place. Um, and also the rest of the foods that we consume that are genetically modified is, you find this in starches, like especially you have the potato starch, you have those corn starches, even the wheat, the tapioca, like all these various things there we have genetically modified. And also the vegetable oils that we use, a lot of those things use genetically modified soybeans and corn oil and all these different things there, genetically modified. So a lot of those highly processed foods that has those starches in it, that has those vegetable oils in it, a lot of these things are a byproduct of creating those genetically modified, unhealthy, deteriorated foods that we consume. And it's getting to a point where we probably not getting enough nutrients from our food. And that's what um, I like to talk about the nutrient density of food. And one of the first places I remember, I think it was about 10 years ago, I went to this farmer in Florida, and he had one row of plants that was grown conventionally, and he had another row of plants that's grown God's design, and he used a lot of, God's methods, feeding the soil. He had done some of the double digging and different stuff like that, and he showed the comparison between the two plants. And the other plant looked so much healthier, like the one that was used in God's method, God's design, and the others not as healthy. And the other plant, it actually grew quicker using God's design, God's method.
It's interesting that when they first started growing genetically modified soybeans, the geese that love to eat soybeans would come out of the, as they sprouted and came out of the ground, they would walk right through a field, all the way through a field that had non-genetically modified soybeans. They wouldn't eat that stuff. The animals knew better, but and the same thing in a field, in a pasture. Unless you fence animals in, they will not eat that excessively green growth around manure.
Yeah.
Because that's unhealthy, and they know better. They will eat right down. You think they're almost nibbling it right down to the earth, but they won't go over and eat that green stuff unless you fence them in. They're starving, and then they have no choice. So the animals know better. We need to start getting educated like them.
Yeah. And I think, what we have to get to, especially with what we want to talk about in this workshop that we conducting here this afternoon. We're gonna have a class where we go into more details about this stuff. Right now, we just want to give a little teaser interview. Um, One of the things that we have to understand is our plants we don't shouldn't get nutrients just by the fertilizer or whatever that we add to it. That we actually have to, approach it from a soil standpoint. The health of that soil and also by having the soil to be healthy, you actually give the plants more nutrition. And not only more nutrition, but then if you're out there and you're growing your own food, you have your own plot of land, you're able to pick those crops close to during ripening time, which makes a big difference. With commercial agriculture, it's picked green, maybe trying to get ripe, half ripe, and they have to ship it on a truck, sometimes on cargo ships across other countries.
Well, when you talk about the genetics of a plant today, we want the plants that are genetically adapted to feeding the microbes in the soil that would feed them. But today, the genetics of plants are adapted to shippability. In other words, a tough type skin, cosmetic appeal. You have to have a look to it. You you design the plant so it ripens the crop all at the same time, so you can mechanically harvest it all at the same time. You have many different genetic selections. We're not even talking modification, just plain selection, because the best food for you to grow on your soil, I should say the best seeds for you to grow on your soil are seeds from plants that grew on your soil naturally. But when you are buying these seeds and they're designed for cosmetic appeal, and they're designed for shippability, and they're designed for mechanical harvesting and things and a volume, empty volume. That's not nutritious. You're selecting for the wrong things. And so it's very important to save your own seed, because when you save your own seed, then you have, if you've grown naturally, then you have them prepared immediately when they start to grow to feed the microbes in the soil. Now you have to learn how to re-inoculate that soil and how to put the microbes back into that soil. And we'll be doing some of that tomorrow when we do the planting. We'll be not only inoculating them with the microbes that should be there on the plants, but also using what are called biostimulants that help these microbe populations to expand so that they can have even more feeding capacity to the plants. So we got these two things that we're dealing with. We're dealing with the genetics of the plant that has to be reestablished again the way God designed it, and we're dealing with the nutrition that the plants is supposed to receive God's way by his feeding design, which is, genetics that is feeding the soil, not being shut off because generation after generation a fertilizer was put on that made them say, well, why should I exude any nutrition into the soil for these microbes when I'm getting it free from fertilizer? But that fertilizer, like we know how to balance fertilizer like God does, no, the microbes are the ones that have it balanced.
Exactly.
God's design, you can't beat his design. All you can do is benefit from it if you work with it.
Yep. It's almost like man is trying to mimic what God has done, and then we always come back full circle back to what God has already created. It's like, you can't, it's so complex. We don't even understand how complex the soil is and all the microorganisms in the soil and the ecosystem. Now, one of the things, I grew up in St. Lucia, and we were blessed to have a volcanic island that sat down and wasn't inhabited, I guess, when people migrated there. So that is a blessing where sometimes we put seeds in the ground and it just grows,
Well, you need to understand, volcanic soil is one of the richest soil on earth because it's highly paramagnetic. Plants also grow through electricity. And so this electromagnetic energy that is emanating from the volcanic soil, that really increases production. I've grown green beans many different places. And I remember when I was growing them on the volcanic cinders of Mount Lassen, a volcano in Northern California. And I grew a crop of beans. It produced wonderfully. Grew a second crop, which I don't usually get much of a second crop here in Connecticut and most places I grow. I grew a second crop, produced wonderfully. I started to grow a third crop, and then winter came. And so that was the end of it. But it was growing perfectly. That was because, not because there were any more nutrition in that soil, but because the electric flow was so strong. So volcanic soils have another aspect that's a real blessing, which is why there's a lot of life lost often when volcanoes erupt quickly, because folks are encroaching on it all the time in agriculture because it's such good soil. So it's nice. It's good to remember, because like in compost making, a friend of mine always adds basalt. Now, basalt is a rock that came from a volcano, and so he will add that into his compost because it helps increase the productivity and the well-being of the plants. And he has some really nice compost as a result of that. So that's another aspect of learning God's creation design and working
Yeah.
with it.
Yeah, definitely. And when I taste the foods back home versus when I eat the foods there, it's such a difference. And also the ripening of the crops.
Yeah.
The back home, and I guess the warm and humidity and everything, it helps that. But even when I lived in Florida, it was a little bit different. Back home, in 1 or 2 days, you leave the papaya out and it just ripens and it's sweet as ever, like very sweet. And up here, I don't think I've ever tasted a sweet papaya. Like,
It's a sand. It's a sand
Yeah.
environment. Sand does not have much nutrition in it,
Yeah.
especially once you cut off the the plants on it,
Yeah.
and because the plants have been building organic matter, and but the natives of Brazil, they knew what to do. When they removed the forest, what they did is they charred it. They charred that wood and then put it back in the soil. And whereas this microbial system that feeds the plant is supported by humus, which is broken down plant material, which lasts for hundreds of years up in the northern climate, the north temperate zone. The closer you get to the equator, it doesn't break down, and it only lasts a very short time until it doesn't last hardly at all unless you char it. So the natives of Brazil, they understood that, and they would char their jungle, that material, woody material, and then put it back in the soil. And these soils are now being found hundreds of years later and being used as very rich agricultural lands that were built by the natives hundreds of years back because they understood God's design and
Yeah.
used it. So in the tropics, you would want to have, and say, as far south as Florida, Texas, those are our southern states. You want to use biochar in the soil, but as you go farther north, you don't need it. You just let your organic matter decompose during
Yeah.
the winter months.
Yeah.
It's the winter months in which you get that long-term, hundreds of year humus
Yeah.
in the soil there. So different parts of the world
Yeah.
have different systems, but we got to use God's system to be blessed.
Yeah. And it's so interesting, talking about the also the regenerative side of agriculture, which just means, that you put the stuff back into the soil, you don't take stuff out. And I remember this, when I started learning about agriculture, probably about like 13, 14 years ago. I remember looking at this lady, and she had this greenhouse. And what she would do, she had a different methods of stuff that she would do, but one of the things that she did was take all the crops that she had and she would put it into water and let it decompose really quickly and put all that water back into the plants and water plants with those. And also the roots and everything, she would cover those, sometimes turn over the soil and cover it, and for about 2 weeks or so, and let that decompose in the soil to feed the microorganisms in the soil.
Yeah,
Once
there's
again.
many different methods of growing your plants and enhancing. We have the decay microbes and all the food that they make
Yeah.
for the plant too. So many different methods, but they vary from the north temperate regions all
Yeah.
the way down into the tropics, and we have to learn how to grow according to our own environmental
Yeah.
condition
Yeah.
and according to the seed. When you buy seed, you don't know where it's grown on the planet and what environmental conditions it was grown under. But if you were growing your own seed, that's the highest quality seed, and it gets better and better with every generation that you do. So God's way, you can't beat it.
Yeah, definitely. And even just, talking about adaptation, and that's, so important for agriculture and especially for me, learning how to grow hair in the north because I'm used to the tropics. And could you imagine in St. Lucia, people started using some chemical fertilizers and all this stuff for the banana production, and it's just amazing that we have all these resources.
It discharges that
Yeah.
electricity. It discharges it. Those chemical fertilizers discharge the
Yeah.
electricity. That's a blessing in
Yeah.
that soil, and make it so that it's junky soil now
Yeah,
again.
it's
So,
crazy.
yeah.
But I'm so excited, especially learning about God's method of planting, and even like when I read so many writings of Ellen White and how she talks about specifically about growing food, and I'm like really interesting that she talked about growing food and some of the methods for growing food, even like fruit trees, how to plant fruit trees properly. And, I'm just so amazed by all the information that God has given to us. He hasn't left us in the dark
Yeah.
as it pertains to agriculture. And we can equip ourselves and make ourselves knowledgeable of those things. And that's exactly why we want to have this workshop here. So we can teach people some of those things that maybe our grandparents or great grandparents might have known because they didn't have all this commercialization. So they had to make it work. And the same thing with our bodies. We call sometimes grandma remedies because the grandma knew some of those remedies,
Mhm.
how to treat the body, and this has become a lost art today in our modern day society.
I encourage people that when they're in an area, like when I was down in one of the islands in the Caribbean there, and I say, go to the villages there where the people are the poorest because they can't afford the fertilizers, and they will know the methods that have been used to be able to grow high quality production in the past. And we have to learn from them because they're our professors.
Yes.
And they know how to grow that quality without all these inputs, because there's going to come a day we're not going to be able to afford any of these inputs. So if you're getting away and using rescue chemistry or using fertilizers and things like that, when you can't buy any of them, you're going to be in a real fix. So you'll want to know that better method of natural ways. And so, like I said, the poorer folks are professors.
And that is so amazing. Even back home, um, meat was a luxury because everyone tried subsisted on the land. They had to grow the food, and that's what they ate. So they would eat like meat maybe on the weekends, and they were healthier. They lived longer.
Yes.
And then, like for instance, we as we run this center here, people text us and ask us, my child has the flu, and I brought him to the emergency room. What can I do to help them? And I'm like, you brought your child to the emergency room for flu. Like for me, it's like that should be the easiest thing, the easiest thing that we can do to help our children. It's like
Yes.
this is something simple, but the thing is, where we are in society, we
Mhm.
have forgotten all those methods of growing, those methods of healing ourselves, and to a point where you ask children today, where do strawberries come from? Oh, from Walmart, like they don't even know. They have never seen a strawberry plant. They've never seen food come out of the ground because they live in this concrete jungles, and we
Mhm.
don't know much today about, God's creation. And also, just being out here, we are on 28 acres. I'm constantly reminded of God. Agriculture, when you start to study, even going to the science of agriculture, you can only appreciate God even more. You're like, wow, this thing is much more complex than I have even seen it. Like for me, you just put a seed in the ground and it grows. No, it's much more complex than that when you start to look into the science of everything. And
Yeah.
it's like it just speaks of God, of what God has done and
Well,
created.
the scriptures which God has left us, They give us in Genesis 2:5 said that man there was not a man to till the ground, but that word is not till. That word in Hebrew is actually a work of service. And then in Genesis 2:15, it tells us that man was to dress the garden and keep it that way. Well, that word dress is not the word dress. It's actually the same word as till. It's a work of service. God gave man a work of service to the soil, and that was to maintain the microbial population that produces the fertility for the plant. And then to dress the garden, he gave us a garden design that we were to keep. That design is an ecosystem design that the plants are all working synergistically to encourage each other to grow healthier. It's not one plant and one plant together equals two. It's one plant and one plant together equals 2.2. And then three plants together does not equal three, it equals four. And then five plants together does not equal five, it equals 8, 9, because it has that much effect of altering the medicinal, I like to call it medicine in the plant. It's nothing more than the nutrition that gives us healthfulness. But, with the mindset of today, I use the word medicine. It tells us to be able to grow medicine in plants. It's just the nutrition, the nutrients that should have been there so we didn't get sick. So God's design has to be understood, and the scriptures tell us we need to understand it and to reestablish it. And those that are doing it, and there's an Amish fellow by the name of John Kemp in the United States is leading out in this, and those that are using God's design, they're making quite profitable income now because they have not only higher yields, but they have a longevity now. There's a long shelf life. It lasts much longer because it's full of nutrition. We have the story about Noah getting drunk. And the reason he got drunk is because every time he had grape juice and they put it on the table before the flood, it never went bad. He'd never had grape juice go bad, but the condition of the soil was so damaged after the flood, and he didn't know that it needed to be repaired, that when he put the grape juice on the table, it didn't stay good. It started fermenting. And so he ends up getting drunk. And so that was his first lesson. Things aren't the way they used to be anymore. So we have a responsibility, and God is opening an understanding of that responsibility to the ground, Genesis 2:5, and to the planting design, Genesis 2:15, that we're supposed to be keeping, because in our mercy, he's telling us now how to do it by growing crops in together. In regenerative agriculture, they're actually adding plants to the growing design to rebuild the soil as they increase the nutrient content to it. So this is this is the study that we all have to be into now.
Yeah, definitely. And it's very important, as we said in the beginning, we are living in the last days.
Yeah.
God has instructed us to get out of the cities. We'll be talking about that some more in our presentation this afternoon. But at the same time, as you said, just like with natural remedies, we won't have access to medicine. We can't buy medicine as freely as we can. So we need to learn natural remedies. We wouldn't be able to buy all those fertilizers, all those assistants. And I've seen so many people make the mistake, which if you're growing food, I love you to grow your own food. Like, whatever ways that you need to do, it's better to grow and start learning rather than not do nothing at all. But some of the times when we think about growing, the first thing that come to mind is have those raised beds and add some soil from the store into the raised beds, and it's, I'm not saying that what you're doing is you shouldn't be doing that, but I'm just saying now we get to a point where we're dependent on those products that we buy out there to grow our food. And then now when it comes time for us to grow food, using the environment around us, working with the soil that we already have, then we don't have that knowledge,
Ellen White has encouraged us in commentary 7a on Leviticus 25, she says, our job was to restore the diseased land to health so that it would be a praise and a glory to God. And of course, what's the first angel's message? Give glory to God. So we're to restore the diseased land back to health, not go buy some soil and grow in it, but restore the diseased land to health. And then she said, we're to go teach the whole world how to do that. Everyone should read commentary 7a on Leviticus 25 and what Sister White had to say there.
Yeah.
We have a responsibility,
Yeah.
and it's part of the three angels'
Yeah.
message we're to give is this lifestyle of learning to grow in a way that we have plants and fruit free from sickness and disease.
Yep, definitely. And it's basically what we want to talk about here this weekend. And we don't want anyone to be left in darkness. We want us to understand, even though everything will be condensed throughout this whole workshop, even for those who are joining, who are from the New York area or Connecticut, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, any of those areas that might be close by. We border in a lot of states. So then we actually have a practical workshop tomorrow where you can come by and practically learn about the soil and how to grow your foods and how to prepare beds and all those various practical information that we want to share here. But this afternoon and this evening as well, when we have our 3 hours of classes, we want to be talking about some of the theoretical aspects of gardening and also God's design for agriculture and also the importance of moving to the country. All those things are important for us to understand. And I see some people are actually asking questions in the chat. You can save your questions for this evening. We're going to have a question and answer segment this evening after the presentations from Brother Jerry, and we'll be talking a lot more about all this stuff that we spoke about right now. And any questions that you have, we want to answer those. So I see that question there. We want to address that in our class this evening. But what we want to just make sure is that you share the class this evening is free. This evening, 3 hours. You can share this as far and wide with as many people as you can. You can use the same link that we have here. We'll log on again from the same link. So we're going to be convening at 4 o'clock this afternoon. So from 4, roughly 7:30, and the question and answer segment might go on for a little bit. So we have some breaks in between. So maybe 7:30, roughly around there, and then we'll share with you guys how you can sign up for our practical workshop tomorrow as well. There is a fee for that, but you will be provided with some seeds and different stuff that you can grow. We have some plants that Brother Jerry brought here from his homestead in Connecticut that he brought here, and we're going to be transplanting that. So teaching you how to transplant properly, how to prepare a bed. So you'll be preparing the bed practical yourself. So if you are in the New York area or surrounding states like Connecticut or Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, you can come in this evening and we'll talk more about how you can sign up to be there tomorrow at our practical workshop. We want as many people as possible to be a part of this workshop. So thank you for all of those who are joining right now for this interview. Do you have any last words before we close off this interview and then we will resume?
We'll be getting into it even more this evening.
Yes. I know he has a lot of information. He has a lot of notes. He has many years, like you said, from the time he was a boy, he started growing foods, and he's 70 plus years right now. So that's like close to 70 years of knowledge, whether it be conventional. Also now he moved into the more organic, regenerative way of growing. I would say God's way of growing, because even regenerative agriculture, is not fully an understanding of God's true method of planting. And we've brought in all the information from everywhere and condensed it into information that we can use today to have the best methods as possible. So this has been recorded. Someone asking, is this recording? We will upload this to our YouTube channel. So if you are in our WhatsApp group, or if you sign up to our emails, you got in here because of our emails, we will share that recording, the link with you guys, so you can watch that on YouTube, rewatch what we have done here on YouTube. So if you're in another time zone and you can't make it this evening, then the recordings will be recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube, so you guys can be able to watch the interview here. And also this evening will be recorded. All the hours in the evening will be recorded as well. So we love to see you guys on. Um, and someone said, I'm glad to see you sharing God's methods. Praise the Lord. Great job. We have known each other. Sister Dawson, nice to see you on. It's been a blessing as well. I know even you guys used to host some agriculture workshops there at your place too as well. So we're so happy to see you on too. And I pray that everyone that has logged in would receive a blessing. And we will end this interview right now and we'll come on at 4 p.m. So remember 4 p.m. Eastern time. So 4 p.m. at Eastern time, and we'll convene our afternoon workshop that we're going to be having together. So until then, we see you guys. Make sure you have lunch, healthy, scrumptious lunch, and then we'll see you guys at 4. Take care.